Okay, we could dismiss the win against Kentucky because it's Kentucky. We can also even discount to a certain extent, even though I wasn't one of those people, discount the win against Tennessee as being a fluke, a late comeback. Everything had to line up perfectly, and it was at home in the swamp against the Tennessee team that hasn't proven itself. But this one was a butt kicking against the third-ranked team in the country, 4-touchdown win, 38-10, Gators over the Rebels. And here to try to explain it, we got David Waters of Gators Sports Radio. David, we've been doing this on a fairly weekly basis, recapping the Gators game. And this one has to put a big smile on your face. I'm just going to flat out ask you, how in the world did this happen?
That is the magic question because, yes, there was a chance for Florida to win this game. As the defense is probably going to keep them in every game, but not the offense from the get-go. Yeah, they didn't score on their first drive, and I think that makes 19 straight games Florida hasn't scored on its opening possession. But that didn't seem to matter, and it didn't seem to slow them down. It's kind of surprising. It looks like Will Grier, that fourth quarter comeback against Tennessee, gave every bit of confidence that he probably needed, and the rest of the offense, the confidence they needed to go out and perform. And, there was the flu rumors were going into the game. Was he going to play? Was he going to start? How well would he play? Could it be the Jordan Gatorade flu game? All these things were floating around. And it kind of seemed that's what it turned out to be. Grier, his numbers, speak for themselves. I don't think anybody knew that was coming. I think in third down was probably the money down. He was 7 of 11 for 107 yards, a touchdown. He's the first UF quarterback to throw for 250-plus yards in consecutive games since Tebow, since 2007. Been a while. But, Gator fans have to be excited. It was, the playmakers showed up on offense. The defense was after Chad Kelly from the get-go and really, really showed up. And you kind of look at now what kind of people considered, top-tier quarterbacks, Patrick Coles, Joshua Dobbs, and now Chad Kelly. The Gators have pretty much held their own in the passing statistics on the defense.
Yeah, so let's start with Grier. Let's get back to his numbers. He barely let the ball hit the ground. 24 of 29, 271, 4 touchdowns, no picks. That's about as perfect a stat line as imaginable, especially against that defense. So the question during the entire offseason was Will Grier versus Treon Harris. And Jim McElwain obviously made the proper call there. And maybe the decision, had we been able to see the competition during August, maybe it wasn't as difficult as it seemed at the time, because this guy has really distinguished himself. So he has a bright future. On the outside, of course, we talked about Demarcus Robinson a lot during the offseason, coming off what really was more a spectacular year if you really understood the issues along the offensive line, and then especially at quarterback with a revolving door and not having experience or talent there, a great deal of passing talent. And Demarcus Robinson, now we see him possibly out of the doghouse, getting the football. He made one incredible catch. He caught 8 on the day for 98. And now he's got a complement of other dynamic playmakers, with Brandon Powell making the huge play that he made, completely splitting the defense and beating everybody to the end zone. Antonio Callaway, he's been a spectacular playmaker. They have weapons now, and Grier's the guy to get him the football.
Right. And, the Florida recruiting wasn't really that bad under Muschamp, even the offensive recruiting. And, people, kind of saw maybe there is some talent there. And then I think you kind of got the leeway in spring when McElwain, wanted to make the move from Brandon Powell from running back to wide receiver. You could kind of see, his way of thinking is going to be a lot different than the previous regime. And then, Antonio Callaway, like you brought him up, he was the only wide receiver Florida signed in this past recruiting class. And look what he's done. It's amazing what he's done. So I bet a lot of other receivers wish they would have made the jump and see but how huge was that? And it was a last minute, signing. They didn't really think, Callaway was going to come along, and 2 weeks in a row now, he's made plays, and he's, Grier, it was really on point. It was not, it wasn't fluke. Like you brought up the Demarcus Robinson catch. Yeah, that was a great catch, but Kim Dichie was all in Will Grier's face. He threw off of his back foot, and, he put that ball anywhere Robinson could come down with it. And that's, a wide receiver making a play. And that's, that he was the guy we knew could do that. But as you said, Powell's now showing up, and I think really big on third downs, tight end Jake McGee. I mean, he really came through converting on third downs, catches with his hands, and Goolsby also another tight end who got in the mix and converted some short yardage plays. But I think it was really, what a surprise the Florida offensive line has been. I mean, we sat there and dogged them before the season started, and I tell you what, offensive line coach Mike Summers deserves a raise, whatever he can get. He was the only holdover from the Muschamp staff, and he has really, really, got a hold of these young guys. At times, 3 freshmen are playing on the offensive line, and these guys have really just shown up.
There's another good coaching move by Jim McElwain, and I don't know if he just fell into it. You'll have to explain and possibly give us some insight. But obviously a number of guys left with Muschamp, but I'm guessing that McElwain also kind of distanced himself from other staff and tried to bring in his own guys. So he kept the offensive line coach.
Right. And, it was kind of the offensive line was kind of a question last year, and they didn't play bad, have many guys drafted going into the NFL. Mike Summers, and he's done wonders, and he came from USC where, that he had a pedigree there. So, he probably was, definitely just one of the guys McElwain had a key in on. It's probably okay to have a little bit of continuity, even if the staff as a whole wasn't good. But he was probably one guy. He's a little older in age than most of the coaches. Probably really didn't want to relocate. Had a bunch of young guys coming in. Was excited to probably work with those guys. And like you said, who really knows what really went on behind the scenes there? But McElwain definitely made the right call.
So as you mentioned, we talked about it a number of times during the offseason about the offensive line. So my 3 big reasons why I couldn't get on board with Florida turning things around quickly was, number one, the question at quarterback. And even if Will Grier would long-term be the guy, it's difficult for a freshman, obviously, to step in who's very inexperienced. Number 2 was the brutal schedule, which is pretty much commonplace in the SEC, but in particular having to play Ole Miss and LSU from the other division. The schedule just looked daunting. So I expected Florida to get better under McElwain, but I just thought, well, the schedule's going to hold them back. And number 3, the offensive line. I just thought the numbers say that they're going to be so thin, and even if a couple of the recruits can step in and play fairly well, the one place you can't be thin and the one place you have to perform to protect everything that happens on offense is against some of the best outside linebackers and DNs in the country in the SEC is offensive line. You have to have the offensive line. And so based on what they've been able to accomplish the last 3 weeks, that's just a great testament to the coaching and the players that have stepped in that have been inexperienced. So we go to the one thing that we counted on going into the season, and you mentioned it. You kind of described what they've been able to do against capable quarterbacks, and that's the defense holding down the rushing attack to 69 yards on 33 attempts. Vernon Hargraves with a pick, and it was just a typical Florida Gator front 7 performance.
Yeah, right. And they absolutely handled, the Ole Miss offensive line. You can pretty much tell they're missing Larry Tunzel whenever maybe the NCAA, investigation finally gets wrapped up for Ole Miss. But you can tell Ole Miss is really missing him when they get into the meat of their schedule. They did get by with Alabama when they played, their great defense. But the Florida defenses are probably a little bit faster than Alabama. I'm not going to say better, but they are faster than the Alabama overall, to me, the Alabama defense. They forced 4 turnovers and sacked Chad Kelly 4 times. They were in his face pretty much almost every time he dropped back to pass. The Rebels only finished, with 310 yards of offense, like 200 yards below their average, and only averaged, 4.2 yards a play. And that's saying something a lot for that Ole Miss offense that was coming in. Alex McAllister, Brian Cox, the defensive tackles, Taven Bryan, you saw him make some plays. And Caleb Brantley, another one. These guys, all of them just showed up, and the big one, and we mentioned the freshman Callaway on offense, the freshman on the defensive line, CeCe Jefferson. Wow. I mean, he comes in, and you could pretty much tell from fall camp, he was the guy who kept getting mentioned on that defensive line. He made a fumble recovery last night, took it down to the 1-yard line, almost got a score out of that. Freshman Cronkite running back scored on the next play. So you can tell these young guys, freshman Callaway, freshman CC Jefferson, Cronkite, all, big plays last night. But yeah, this defensive line really, really showed up. And you say, what can you say about the secondary? Everybody was looking forward to that Hargraves Treadwell matchup, and Treadwell didn't really do much. And I attribute to that. I won't really say it was on him. Play calling had a lot to do with that because of the Florida defensive line just in Kelly's face all night. But when he made some plays, but when it came down to it, Hargraves came on top.
David Waters from Gator Sports Radio with us. And David, what's even more incredible is when you put it into context that this performance wasn't isolated, meaning that the big rival is Tennessee along with Georgia. They beat Tennessee in dramatic fashion. That team had to be on a high. So then they have to bounce back and do the same thing against the number 3 team in the country the next week. So there was no letdown. A young team getting them right back, ready to play, prepared to play, forgetting what they just accomplished, to just turn around and be able to put up that kind of performance. That speaks volumes, too, for the coaching of McElwain and his staff.
Right. And, the most important play, if we're looking into the future, we're not really play, but, just in general, that fourth quarter against Tennessee, this may be McElwain's calling card for his Gator team. That is, could be the program changer that he's looking for at Florida. They've built off of that. Like you said, these young players believing. I said before the season, the Kentucky, Tennessee, Ole Miss, that stretch was the most important stretch of the season. I didn't think they'd go 3-0, but I did say if they beat Kentucky and they beat Tennessee, you never know what confidence can bring when Ole Miss comes to town. And it seemed to be rocking in Gainesville last night. You can see the tweets from all the press that was there. We haven't seen this in years in the Swamp. And, the players are feeding off of it. Everybody's excited. And I'm going to go back and mention, we mentioned all the young players on the Florida team, but it was the big-time Antonio Morrison linebacker who really carried the cowbell last night. He was named the Walter Camp National Defensive Player of the Week this morning. 13 tackles, 3.5 for loss. He was everywhere for the Gators last night.
And this is just about 8 months from that horrible, horrible injury he suffered, and to be able to come back and be this effective, that's incredible too. Oh,
yes, and I think we all remember the screams on the field, and but he and Jared Davis, while the depth at linebacker is thin right now with some of the injuries, those two guys are staying healthy, and believe me, they are making a difference on that field.
Okay, so it never stops in the SEC. You got to play Mizzou this week, and they're somewhat lightly regarded. They've lost a game against Kentucky. They're the 2-time defending division champions. Matty Mock suspended yesterday. Drew Lock came in, played a decent game. They took care of South Carolina. So you go to Mizzou, and if anyone wants to see the oddest box score you're ever going to see, you got to go back to last year's Mizzou game in the Swamp, because I just saw the highlights. I had to watch the highlights to believe the box score, because if you strip away the score, you would think that the Gators won. They dominated in total time of possession, yardage. Missouri couldn't move the football. They had like 100 yards total of offense, but they scored every way imaginable on special teams and defense, and won like the most lopsided in going the other direction, like 44-10 or whatever it turned out to be, game that you can imagine. So you got Mizzou lined up, and you go on the road now.
Right. Yeah. Last year's score 42-13. Like you said, I was there. That was the ugliest game I have ever been to in person, and it was started from the get-go. Missouri returned the kickoff for a touchdown, and as you said, it was interception returns, fumble returns, pick sixes. You name it, and that's how they scored. So Florida really, maybe McElwain's playing the replays of that game all in the locker room all week long to get, the players in the mindset. Missouri has done pretty well against Florida the last couple of years. 2 years ago, the 4-8 year, Florida took Tyler Murphy in there, and he kind of got dinged up, and Florida didn't really stand a chance on the road there. But this is going to be an interesting game. This is really counting. Florida had a lot of home games early in the year, so this is only going to be the second road game in McElwain's tenure at Florida so far. But he has something to build off of, and it's going to be interesting to see how Greer reacts on the road, how these young players go on the road again. Like you said, Missouri pulled out one against South Carolina yesterday, and what was a ugly game between two true freshman quarterbacks. And as you said, Locke, he looked good. He was the highly touted recruit in the home state, stayed in state. Mark gets suspended, and Locke comes in. He looked comfortable. He was efficient. Really wasn't really asked to do much. But that we know that South Carolina defense is not all that great. They would do it Spurrier and Hope they're running that. And but like you said, I think Hansbrough, the running back, has been dinged up a little bit. It hasn't really been the same running back. They don't have the big receivers we're used to seeing from Missouri. Their defensive line, still good, but not Missouri of past. As you can tell, they lost Kentucky earlier this year, so this is not the same Missouri team. But can Florida avoid the letdown? This is going on the road. It's a night game in Missouri. Another night game for Florida too, by the way, which is weird. So many night games this year. So then they'll be sitting in a hotel all day, thinking. So go on the road, and a game they should win, but we'll see what happens.
If the Gators can keep it up, David, this will be an interesting discussion for future weeks. The rankings, if you could strip away preseason perception and just look at resumes and what teams have accomplished, this Florida team, I know that there's no way that they're going to skyrocket in the polls, and I've yet to see the polls that they're going to skyrocket from 25 to the top 5, but they have a top 5 resume right now. And I know it's way too early to think about that. And fortunately, the college football playoff is not connected to the rankings, but they're going to be very undervalued in the rankings this week, despite what they've accomplished. But if you just look at resume and who has beaten whom at 5-0 now, they have beaten 3 very good football teams, especially, of course, this last outing.
Yes, right. And it did just come out not so long ago. They did rocket up to 12th now, so from 25th to 12th. Still, I think Alabama was number 10, I think. So it's kind of interesting, the team Alabama lost to, Florida just pretty much pounded, and 2 spots behind Alabama. It's the preseason perception. It is what it is. Like you said, all this would kind of sort itself out, and the college football playoff rankings come out. Georgia got pounded by Bama yesterday. Bama did play well. But, that is a loss, and Florida did thrash them. So, yeah, if you start on a blank slate, maybe, Florida should be somewhere in the top 10. But, you and I talked before this, who really knows with these teams right now? There's so much parity in college football right now that it makes every week great. I think the week before last, everybody's like, oh, this is a dog week. There's no good games. And it ended up being some of the best games of the season. Then nobody saw Michigan and Florida doing what they're doing right now. And I was kind of joking with the Michigan guys. I said, if you hired a coach named Jim, I think you're doing pretty well. Raise your hand. So the 2 Jims seem to be doing good. And who knows right now with college football? I hate to say it. Florida could go into Missouri and lay an egg. So hopefully not. And maybe that sets up for a big game at LSU the next week. But Florida can't look ahead to that one just yet.
All right, Florida sitting at 5-0. David Waters from Gator Sports Radio here to break it down. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.